I thanked my grandpa for the $100 birthday check. He blinked, then said, "What are you talking about? I wired you $150,000. That's when everyone went silent, except my mom, who suddenly needed some air. I, 25M, work as a commercial underwriter for a regional insurance firm. It's a steady, quiet job. I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment, drive a 7-year-old sedan, and spend my weekends hiking or playing a very average game of golf. I have spent the last 3 years meticulously saving every single spare dollar I made. My goal was simple. I wanted to buy a small starter home. I mapped out my finances, skipped vacations, and cooked 90% of my meals at home. My family knew all about this. They knew exactly how hard I was grinding. My family dynamic has always been slightly skewed. My older brother is 29. He is the classic golden child. He operates a vague, ever-changing string of startups that never actually produce a single product. My mom and dad have always heavily subsidized his lifestyle. They remortgaged their house twice to fund his ventures. I was the independent one, the one they never had to worry about, which basically translated into the one they simply ignored unless they needed free tech support or help moving heavy furniture. Last month was my 25th birthday. My grandpa, who lives 3 states away, flew in for a rare visit. Grandpa is a retired structural engineer. He is sharp, quiet, and extremely observant. To celebrate, my parents organized a dinner at a mid-tier steakhouse downtown. It was me, my mom, my dad, my brother, and my grandpa. The dinner was perfectly normal for about an hour. My brother talked loudly about his new cryptocurrency venture. My mom beamed at him, asking questions about venture capital that literally neither of them understood. I just ate my steak. Grandpa mostly just watched all of us, nursing a glass of scotch. When the dessert arrived, Mom pulled a small stack of envelopes from her designer purse. She handed them across the table to me. She put on this manufactured sweetness she uses in public and said happy birthday, telling me one was from them and one was from Grandpa. I opened my parents' card first. It was a generic drugstore card with a $25 gift card to a local hardware store. I smiled and thanked them. Then I opened the envelope for my grandpa. Inside was a crisp, beautifully handwritten card and a personal check for exactly $100. I looked across the table at him. I smiled genuinely and said thank you. I told him I really appreciated the check and that it was going straight into the house fund. Grandpa stopped mid-sip. He lowered his glass slowly to the table. He looked at me, his brow furrowing deeply. He didn't look confused. He looked intensely alert. He asked me what check I was talking about. His voice was quiet, but it completely cut right through the ambient noise of the busy restaurant. I held up the piece of paper and said the $100 check, right here in the card. Grandpa blinked. He looked at the card in my hand. Then he looked directly at my mom. The temperature at the table dropped about 20 degrees in a single second. He locked eyes with my mother and stated very clearly that he didn't write me a check. He said he wired me $150,000 the previous Tuesday. He said he sent it directly to the account my mother provided specifically for my home down payment. The silence that followed was absolute. I stopped breathing. My brain completely stalled out. $150,000. I looked at my mom. Her face had instantly drained of all color. She looked like a literal ghost. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. My dad suddenly found his cloth napkin incredibly interesting, refusing to make eye contact with anyone at the table. My brother just sat there, completely frozen, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. Mom abruptly pushed her chair back. The leg scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. She gasped out that she needed some air. She turned around and practically sprinted toward the restaurant exit. Grandpa didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. He just looked at me calmly and told me to check my banking app right that second. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so violently, I actually dropped it on the table once. I opened my banking app. I checked my primary checking. Normal. I checked my savings. Normal. Grandpa leaned in, his voice hard as stone. He told me she said she set up a special joint escrow account with me to hold the funds safely until I closed on property. He said she gave him the routing and account numbers. claiming I requested it that way to handle the massive transfer fees. A cold, sickening realization washed over me. When I was 16, I got my very first job bagging groceries. My mom had opened a joint student checking account with me because I was a minor. When I turned 18, I opened my own solo accounts at a completely different bank. I completely forgot that old student account even existed. I assumed the bank had closed it for inactivity years ago. I frantically downloaded the app from my old bank, right there at the table. I used the forgot password feature. It took me 3 agonizing minutes to bypass the security questions. Finally, the dashboard loaded. There it was, an account listed under both our names. Current balance, $12.43. I clicked on the recent transactions. Exactly 10 days prior, there was a massive incoming wire transfer, $150,000 from my grandpa's trust account. 2 days after that, there were 3 massive outgoing transfers. One transfer for $85,000 to an LLC registered to my brother. One transfer for $45,000 to my parents' primary mortgage lender. One transfer for $19,987.57 to a luxury car dealership in town. They hadn't just intercepted the money, they had slaughtered it. They completely liquidated my entire future in less than 48 hours to bail out my brother and buy themselves a brand new car. I stood up. I didn't say a single word. I walked away from the table, leaving my dad, brother, and grandpa sitting there. I walked out into the cool night air of the parking lot. My mom was pacing furiously between the parked cars, holding her phone tightly against her chest. When she saw me, she immediately put her hands up in a defensive posture. She started rambling, her voice shrill and panicked. She told me I didn't understand the full picture, that I needed to calm down and just let her explain. I asked her where my money was. My voice was completely flat. She instantly pivoted from defensive to completely aggressive. She snapped at me that it was family money. She claimed Grandpa was getting older and didn't understand how modern finances worked. She said my brother was facing a major liquidity crisis with his company, and if he didn't get a massive capital injection immediately, he was going to lose everything. She had the absolute nerve to look at me and say I had a steady job, I didn't need a house right now, and I could just keep renting. She said they simply reallocated the funds to where the family needed them most and promised they were totally going to pay me back. I stared at her. I told her she paid off her mortgage. I told her she bought a car. She waved her hand dismissively, like I was bringing up a minor detail. She said those were necessary expenses. She claimed the debt-to-income ratio was negatively affecting their credit score, and they desperately needed a reliable vehicle for my dad's bad back. Then she crossed her arms and told me I was being incredibly selfish. She said I was acting entitled to money I didn't even earn. The sheer, unadulterated delusion of her statement was staggering. She stole $150,000 meant for my future, and she was calling me entitled. I told her I wanted it back by Monday. My dad and brother had walked out of the restaurant and finally joined us in the parking lot. My dad immediately stepped in front of my mom to shield her. He sternly told me to lower my voice. He said my mother was under a lot of stress and the money was gone. He claimed it was invested in my brother's company, which was going public next year, and they would give me the down payment then with interest. He actually told me I needed to be a team player. I looked at him and said I was going to the police. My brother scoffed. He actually laughed in my face. He told me to grow up. He smugly pointed out that it was a joint account. He said her name was on it. So legally, she had every single right to withdraw those funds. He told me I didn't know what I was talking about, and I was just throwing a tantrum because I didn't get a free handout. I turned around, got into my car, and drove away. I didn't sleep a single minute that night. I sat at my small dining table, printing out every single bank statement, every transaction record, and every piece of proof I could gather. The next morning, the dirty tricks officially started. My mom realized I was not going to let this go quietly. She went on the absolute offensive. By noon, my phone was exploding with text messages and calls from extended family members. My aunt left a scathing, yelling voicemail calling me a greedy, ungrateful sociopath who was trying to put my own brother out on the streets. My mom had completely spun the narrative. She told everyone that Grandpa had given a large sum of money to the family as a whole to manage together, and that I was demanding all of it for myself to buy a luxury bachelor pad while my brother struggled to keep his business afloat. Then, she took it a massive step further. I got home from work on Monday evening to find 2 uniformed police officers standing right outside my apartment door. My stomach completely dropped. I walked up to them and identified myself. The older officer looked at me very sternly. He told me they received a call from my mother. He said she claimed I showed up at her house that morning, violently threatened her physically, and tried to extort her for money. He said she was requesting an emergency restraining order. I stood there completely stunned. She was actually trying to legally weaponize the police to intimidate me into silence. I invited the officers inside. I asked them to sit down. I pulled out my laptop and opened my text messages. I synced my phone to my screen. I told them I was at my office all morning. I pulled up my work badge scans and the security footage timestamps I had preemptively requested from my building manager just to be safe. I proved I hadn't been anywhere near her house in weeks. Then I showed them the text messages she had sent me that very morning. She texted me saying I better drop this because the money was gone. She threatened that if I tried to sue them, she would tell everyone I stole from them and make sure I lost my job. The next text said they were my parents. I owed them, and I needed to stop acting like a spoiled brat. She actually wrote that the money saved my brother, and I should be thanking them for keeping the family afloat. The officers read the text. Their stern expressions slowly morphed into deep, heavy annoyance. They realized instantly that they were being used as pawns in a massive financial dispute. The officer handed my phone back, sighed, and said this was a civil matter regarding stolen funds. He confirmed she filed a false report and said they would document everything. He looked me in the eye and told me if he were me, he would speak to a shark of an attorney immediately. I didn't just speak to an attorney. I spoke to an absolute predator. I hired a heavy-hitting litigator specializing in complex financial fraud. We sat down in his office on Wednesday. Grandpa flew back specifically to attend the meeting. He was furious, a quiet, terrifying kind of furious. My lawyer reviewed all the documents and bank statements. He leaned back in his leather chair and told me my brother was actually right about one specific thing. He explained that because her name was legally on that joint account, her withdrawing the money did not strictly constitute bank fraud in the traditional sense, because the bank allowed it as she was an authorized signer. My heart completely sank. I asked him if she just gets away with it. He smiled this thin, cold smile. He said he didn't say that. He explained that while it might not be criminal bank fraud under Title 18, it was absolutely civil conversion and unjust enrichment. She took property that clearly belonged to me and used it for her own benefit. He pointed out that Grandpa's wire transfer receipt explicitly stated in the memo line, "Gift from my home purchase." The legal intent of the funds was heavily documented. Grandpa leaned forward then. He told the lawyer he had a phone call with the bank branch manager before he wired the money. He explained that because it was a very large sum going to a completely dormant account, the bank flagged it for security. The bank required a signed authorization form from the primary account holder, which was me, confirming the origin and intent of funds before they would release the security hold. I looked at Grandpa. I told him I never signed anything. My lawyer sat up completely straight. The atmosphere in the room changed in an instant. He asked me if I was absolutely certain. I told him I hadn't stepped foot in that specific bank branch in 7 years. My lawyer immediately drafted a subpoena and a formal request for documents to the bank. Because Grandpa was the originator of the wire, his legal counsel had massive leverage to demand answers. Within 48 hours, the bank's legal department produced the authorization form. Right there on the bottom line was my signature. It was a decent forgery, but it definitely wasn't mine. The loops were way too tight. My lawyer looked at the document and just laughed softly. He said this changes absolutely everything. He explained my brother's assessment of the law was incorrect. While accessing a joint account is legal, forging a signature on a federally regulated bank document to deliberately bypass a security hold on an interstate wire transfer is a massive problem. He told us that is explicitly wire fraud and bank fraud under federal law. Both are federal felonies. We spent the next week quietly building a legal guillotine. I didn't text my mom back. I didn't call my dad. I let them think they had completely won. I let them believe my silence was total submission. My mom even had the audacity to post a photo on Facebook of her and my brother out to a fancy lunch, captioning about being so blessed to have a family that supports each other through thick and thin with some ridiculous entrepreneur hashtags. While she was posting hashtags, my lawyer and I were drafting a massive civil lawsuit for conversion, fraud, unjust enrichment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We named my mom, my dad, and my brother as co-defendants. But the civil suit was just the secondary weapon. The primary weapon was a criminal report. My lawyer arranged a sit-down meeting with an investigator from the local district attorney's office and an agent from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, given the interstate nature of the wire transfer and the large dollar amount involved. We handed over the forged bank document, Grandpa's sworn affidavit regarding the intent of the funds, the bank statement showing the immediate disbursement of the money to my brother and my parents' debts, and the text messages of my mom literally admitting she took the money. The federal agent took the thick file. He told us investigations take time to build airtight cases. We told him we had plenty of time. While we waited, I also took a much closer look at my brother's supposed company. I pulled the public LLC filings. I paid a private investigator a few $100 to run a basic, quiet asset check. It turned out my brother's company had absolutely zero employees. It had no office space. It had no actual product or services. What my brother did have, however, was a massive, documented history of illegal offshore sports betting. He didn't need a capital injection for a tech startup. He needed $85,000 immediately to pay off catastrophic, dangerous gambling debts. My mom didn't sacrifice my future to save a legitimate family business. She sacrificed my future because her precious golden child was extremely deep with incredibly dangerous creditors, and she chose his massive gambling addiction over my life. It took exactly 3 months of the trap to spring. 3 months of agonizing silence while they drove their brand new luxury SUV around town, and my brother played fake businessman. The climax didn't happen in a sterile courtroom. It happened on a random Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my desk when I got a frantic, hysterical phone call from an unknown number. I let it go straight to voicemail. 2 minutes later, I got a panicked text from my dad demanding I pick up the phone right now because the police were at the house with a warrant. I took an early lunch break. I drove over and parked down the street from my parents' house. I just sat in my car and watched the show. There were 3 unmarked sedans parked aggressively on their perfectly manicured front lawn. 2 federal agents and 2 local detectives were carrying heavy boxes of financial documents and computer hard drives right out the front door. My mom was standing on the front porch, wearing her expensive silk robe, completely sobbing hysterically. A female detective was calmly reading her Miranda rights. They placed my mother in handcuffs, put her in the back of an unmarked car, and drove her away. 30 minutes after the cops left, the private process servers arrived. My dad, who was still standing in the driveway looking completely shell-shocked and defeated, was handed a massive, heavy stack of legal documents. It was our civil lawsuit, and tucked right in the middle of that lawsuit was a formal notice of lease pendens. A lease pendens is a formal legal notice recorded in the county registry. It signifies that a pending lawsuit involves a direct claim on the title to a piece of real estate, because they had used $45,000 of my stolen money to pay down their primary mortgage. My lawyer successfully argued to a judge that their house was now partially funded with stolen, illicit funds. The lease pendens effectively froze their entire property. They could not sell it. They could not refinance it. They could not extract a single dime of equity from it to pay for criminal defense lawyers until my civil lawsuit was entirely settled. My phone started ringing continuously. I ignored every single call. The legal fallout over the next year was absolute, systematic devastation for them. The justice system is slow, but when it has a crystal clear paper trail of forged bank documents and interstate wire fraud, it moves like an absolute freight train. My mom was formally indicted on federal felony charges. Because the evidence was completely irrefutable, The bank literally had security camera footage of her submitting the forged document in person to the teller. Her expensive defense attorney told her a trial would be absolute suicide. She took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to felony bank fraud. She avoided federal prison only because it was her first offense, and Grandpa, showing a sliver of mercy I absolutely wouldn't have, asked the judge for leniency regarding actual incarceration. She was sentenced to 5 years of strict federal probation, 500 hours of community service, and ordered to pay full criminal restitution. She now has a permanent federal felony on her record for the rest of her life. My brother's life completely imploded. When the Fed started digging into the money trail, they found his massive illegal offshore gambling accounts. They audited his fake LLC and found he'd been claiming completely fraudulent business losses on his taxes for years to hide money. The IRS stepped in hard. They seized his bank accounts. He was forced to declare complete bankruptcy and is currently under a massive ongoing investigation for tax evasion. The civil suit was an absolute bloodbath. My parents had zero liquid cash left to fight a protracted legal battle, especially while paying exorbitant criminal defense fees. They defaulted. We easily secured a summary judgment against them for the full $150,000, plus all my legal fees and massive punitive damages. Because of the lease pendens and the final summary judgment, we legally forced the sale of their precious house. The court ordered the property to be sold at market value. From the proceeds of the sale, the remaining mortgage was paid off to bank, and then my massive judgment was satisfied completely. My parents were left with a tiny, pathetic fraction of their equity. They had to move out of the affluent, wealthy suburb they had lived in for 20 years and rent a small, run-down apartment in an adjacent, much cheaper town. They had to sell that luxury SUV at a massive financial loss just to afford the security deposit on the rental. I got every single penny back, all $150,000. I closed on my house last month. It's a beautiful, completely renovated 2-bedroom property with a large, quiet backyard. Grandpa flew out to help me paint the living room. We ordered pizza, drank cheap beer, and didn't talk about my parents a single time. It was the most peaceful, perfect weekend of my entire life. I haven't spoken to my mom, dad, or brother in 14 months. The extended family members who had so eagerly attacked me on Facebook and called me greedy have gone completely and utterly silent after the details of the felony plea deal, the gambling debts, and the forged documents became public record. They finally realized they backed a literal criminal, and their sudden, embarrassing silence is the loudest apology I could ever ask for. Sometimes late at night, I sit out on my new back porch and just look up at the stars. I think about the sheer, blinding entitlement it takes to look your own child dead in the eye and justify stealing their entire future to buy a car and fund a gambling addiction. I realize that blood absolutely does not make a family. Shared values, respect, and fundamental trust make a family. When you completely remove those things, all you are left with is a shared genetic code with complete strangers. They genuinely thought I was just a quiet, reliable son who would eventually roll over, take the abuse, and accept my place at the bottom just to keep the peace. They thought they could outsmart the system because they believed they were inherently deserving of whatever they wanted. They learned the absolute hardest possible lesson. The truth doesn't care about your ego, and the law definitely doesn't care about your entitlement. When you light a match to burn someone else's house down, you shouldn't be surprised when the wind suddenly shifts and you burn your own life to ash. If you want to hear more stories about how to legally, systematically dismantle toxic family members while simultaneously securing a solid fixed-rate mortgage, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I might just drop a full legal tutorial on filing a lease pendens next week.